Well, even though we've had 3 exorcisms, this episode proves that Reverend Anderson might not even know what he's doing. Hey guys, camera for Outcast, Season 1, Episode 4, Wrath Unseen. I was definitely looking forward to this episode. I absolutely love the first 3 episodes. Even the 3rd episode, even though I didn't think it was as good as the first 2 episodes, I still really love the 3rd episode. I still thought there was some really great stuff done in that one. But I was hoping that we weren't going the direction the 3rd episode showed. The 3rd episode made me think we were kind of going this procedural direction, and I'm glad we didn't, because as much as I liked what they did with that story in that episode, do I want Outcast to be a procedural show? Hell no, because the story we have here is so interesting, especially in this episode. It shows that what we thought was going on and what we thought could have been the savior of this show, you know, our 2 leads, could be the downfall of what's going on. We'll get into that, but let's just get into this episode. There's a lot to talk about. We start off right at Norville's funeral, and I love the way we show this, because obviously, as we know, Norville died, and Anderson says a prayer which only has Kyle and Caleb in attendance, and Anderson asks if Kyle wants to say anything. Kyle says nothing, and Anderson tells Caleb to start the burial, and Sydney then arrives late, and finally, like I said his name in the last episode, but we actually get a name from him here, and Anderson says he didn't expect anyone else to be coming, asks if he's family. Sydney says he's just a friend who knew he was struggling with the loss of Elise, but had no idea how hopeless he must have felt, and Anderson gives his condolences, and Sydney introduces himself and asks if Kyle and Norville were close. Kyle says that he was his neighbor, Sydney says that he was the man who found him, and Sydney says that Norville spoke about him very fondly. And again, Sydney's doing a really good job of covering this up and acting just like a random guy, and not the guy that actually most likely is the one that's, you know, the one that is, the head of all these evil demons. You know, he seems to be the one that's ahead of it, and says he's going to be in town for a while to put Norville's affairs in order. He hopes to see him around, says goodbye to them as he walks out, and that's the only scene we see of Sydney in this episode. But you know what? That was enough, because again, whoever plays him, I don't know the guy's name that plays him, but he just does an incredible job at just creeping us out. I mean, everything he says, we know isn't true. He most likely is the one that killed Norville, even though, you know, there could be a possibility that he's not. I mean, I think he's probably the one that did it. I mean, it was his blade, his hat was there. Most likely, this is the guy that did it. And I'm going to say right now, I think he's definitely the one that did it. Brett Spiner, I think, is just killing it. As this character. I think he really is doing a fantastic job, and I'm very happy that he is the main character, because he really is fantastic here, and especially as a villain, he really is great. So, Anderson's then with the woman, who like I said, was in the last episode. She is here, and we still don't have a name for her. I don't know if we're going to ever, but we still don't have a name for her. They're looking at several antiques, and asks what it is, and Anderson says it's his collection, tells her people who he helps out have given him things, and it doesn't feel right to throw them out, so he keeps them to represent the victories, and she asks him about one, and he remembers back to when Mildred was possessed, and the woman asks if he's okay, and he says it was a hard one, and she says she bet they all were, and Anderson says that it's his ex-wife Janet. She thought that it was sad, like an old high school quarterback living the glory days, and he doesn't think that she think much of his collection, and the woman says she doesn't care really what Janet thinks, and it's a nice scene, but I like that we now know that Mildred was actually possessed. You know, Mildred being one of the ladies that Kyle was first introduced to, Mildred being one of the ones that's one of his regulars in the church and is there all the time, and one of his recruits as well. Remember, he recruited all those people to get people in the church, and Mildred was one of those people, and you definitely get the sense that there's more going on with her than we think, and we'll get into that in a little bit. But as much as the episode focuses on Mildred, the main storyline in this episode is going on with Megan and Mark. Their whole storyline, I think, is overall really interesting. Megan and Mark are getting ready to go on a date. Mark lets the sitter in, and Mark talks to her on the date about taking a vacation at the ocean. And right away, we see Megan sees Donnie arrive with his buddies, and Donnie has a lot more screen time this episode, and I don't know about this guy. I mean, even though we finally find out what he did in this episode, I'll get into that, but just the way he talks, I don't think that he's changed at all. Donnie goes up to her, says that he thought it was her. Mark asks if he knows him. Donnie asks where is his horse, because Megan always used to say a knight on a big white stallion was going to come and carry her away someday. Donnie asks if she remembers she used to act it out with her Barbies and plastic horse. He introduces himself and says him and Megan go way back. Mark asks how he knew he was a cop. Donnie says Facebook, and it's scary to think about how there's shit out there for anyone to see there, and compliments him on Holly. Mark asks if he lives around there, and Donnie says that he hasn't for years. He's just back in town to sell tires, we find out, is why he's there. And probably the most random reason, but he says if he needs some rubber, he will hook him up, and tells Megan that they should get some coffee at some point, and says he doesn't want to interrupt their dinner any longer. He tells Megan that she looks great, tells Mark it was a pleasure to meet him. He leaves, and Mark, of course, can tell there's something up with this guy. Just Megan does not seem like she's happy he's there, and Mark asks if he should be jealous. Megan says it's not funny. Mark asks if there's something wrong with him, and she says that he was just an asshole, dumb jock and bully, and she thought she'd never see him again. He asks if he wants him to kick his ass. She says no, but don't even think about buying any tires from him. And even though she's saying in a very playful way, obviously you know there's more going on there. You know she's obviously, really worried about what's going on there, and she's really worried that he's going to strike at her at some point, definitely. So, Giles then hosts a barbecue at his house with another couple. His dog comes out, barks loudly at the couple, and I'm wondering, is there something possibly going on with that couple? Because we know the dogs can sense things very well, so I'm kind of wondering if someone there is possessed. But when the wives go inside, Giles returns the watch that Mark recovered in the trailer to his friend, and you can tell that somehow his friend is connected to all this. Now, how he is, I don't know, but somehow he's involved, and you definitely do see that, because there's obviously a reason why he gave that watch to his friend. I don't know if Giles is suspicious of this guy, but we'll get into that in a little bit, because that's really interesting. Kyle then goes into a bar, and he sees Donnie, who Kyle seems to have a connection to as well, and says he'd say it's just a coincidence, given how small the town is, and he tells Kyle he's there on business, and says he saw Megan today, she looked good. Kyle immediately lunges at him and attacks him, and it's clear that Kyle knows the history that Megan and Donnie have. Again, we don't know what it is, but they're both kicked out of the bar, and Donnie asks if this is how it's going to be. Kyle fights him. It's just like he's fighting any demon. I was wondering if they were going to go in this direction that Donnie was possessed. That's what I thought they were doing. Now, luckily, they don't do that. What they do is actually a lot more interesting. Donnie tells him to stay down, don't fight, knocks him down. Kyle tells him to stay away from her. Donnie says he was trying to play the guardian angel. He needs to figure it out that they don't exist, and Donnie, what I like is that, he's actually not involved in the possession storyline at all. He's not possessed. He doesn't at least appear to be, and I'm hoping that he's not possessed. I'm hoping this is just another demon, figurative demon from Megan's past that she's called, when not an actual literal demon, because that I think is a lot more interesting, because if I had to sum up Outcast, it'd be about people coping with demons, literal and figurative, and I think Megan's demons are all figurative, definitely. So Megan's in getting groceries. Kyle calls her, asks where she is. He's been trying to call her all morning. She says she didn't recognize the number, and he says he got a new phone and asks where she is. And she says at the thrift store. She asks what's wrong. He says he ran into Donnie last night and asks if something happened, and she assures him that nothing did. And I love seeing Kyle as this protective brother, especially after we've heard the past that Kyle's had. I like that how protective he is of Megan. You really do get the sense that he is that protective brother that Megan needs. And basically, he has a swimming ham. She assures him nothing did. He asks what they're going to do. She says they're doing nothing, and he says he can't just ignore this, and she says that he can. He's enough trouble as it is, and the last thing he needs to do is to get mixed up with him, and she says he didn't. He says he can't just not do anything. He needs to make sure he does something. This is obviously a man that really scares her, and she says to promise her. He agrees. She thanks him for checking in, but she's fine, hangs up before Kyle can say what he wants to say to her, and you don't know what he wants to say, but you know there's definitely something he wants to say to her, so I thought that was interesting. Anderson's then cleaning up the cemetery, and Kyle says he went by the church, and Florence says he was there. Anderson says that the woman cannot keep her mouth shut, and Kyle asks if he was here all day. Anderson says that one of the things that sucks about his job is that everyone wants something from him. Every misery they suffer, every dying grandma or cheating husband, it all gets dumped on him, because he's the reverend, and he's the one that needs, people go to for confession, they go to for prayers, they go to for condolences, and he's kind of, while he enjoys doing it, it's not something he dislikes doing, it is a lot, because he has to help all these people, and, if they're not healed, they're gonna pin the blame on him, and I think they're doing a really good job with really showing how hard of a job it is to be, a reverend, and Preacher does this too, but I think Outcast is doing a better job with it, and I really do like that. So Kyle says that they all do, and Anderson says to give him a hand, and Anderson says that he tracked him, so what can he do for him? And Kyle asks how he gets his case victims, and asks if he has a backbone in the church or something. And Anderson says he's pitching for some action, and you realize that this is what Kyle wants to do. He no longer wants just high in his house. He wants to work with Anderson full time. Kyle says the people close to him get hurt. It's been going on for a long time. He feels it still is, and he doesn't feel like sitting on his ass anymore. And even though he can't help Megan, this has kind of motivated him to help help people get these demons out of them, exorcise some demons. And Aaron says he certainly wasn't last night. He heard he got hurt, he got knocked out, and Kyle says that it's all business, that he has nothing to do with this, and Kyle says, and Anderson says that it does, that he has a gift, and he wants to help him use it, but he also has reputation, and people got to be willing to let him in the door, and if he wants to fight the devil, he needs to start by cleaning up his fucking act, and he's going to help him do so, and I thought that was definitely very interesting. So Anderson then asks him if he has any plans for the rest of the day, tells him they're going to go for a drive, and Giles then goes out to investigate evidence in the woods, and we don't really know what he's searching for. He knows he's going for something, but he doesn't really know if he's going to find anything. He just knows that Mark was successful and that he's taking over now, and I thought that was definitely interesting, and I like that we're really starting to jumpstart on this case, you can definitely tell. So Anderson then takes Kyle to a house, says the exorcism is the last resort, his goal is to not have to perform another one, and Kyle asks if the cocktail is the weapon, and Anderson says that it's more like a vaccine, and their job is to help people resist the dark forces, not a devil afoot in that door. And Kyle says he doesn't see how that fits into Sarah, Allison, or Joshua, because they did nothing to let the devil in, and really, no, they didn't really do anything. They were just kind-hearted souls, and we know they really didn't do much of anything. They kind of just got in them, and Anderson then rings the doorbell, and a woman, Sophie, answers and asks how her mother is. She says she's not so sure, asks if she can talk to him alone, and Sophie says that she can't do this anymore. She used to be so sweet when the kids were little. She just dotted out and loved to visit them, but now she's just this cranky old bitch, and Anderson says that she always has been a character. Sophie says she's changed, and Anderson looks at the antique, remembers the exorcism on Mildred, and says he still looks at himself as a 20-year-old bug, but then he looks at himself in the mirror and doesn't recognize the old farce staring back at him. Sophie says the things she says, the old vile stuff that comes out of her mouth, such as calling her 13-year-old daughter a whore, and just got a hold of her tongue. Kyle then hears Mildred call out, goes to her, says they're here to drop off her groceries. She says she knows who he is, and it's a pity about Sarah. He thanks her. Now, we know that obviously these two have had an encounter before, but, Kyle briefly saw her, so he doesn't really remember her name, and she said it's a nice place, and she's got there, and she says that it used to be, but everything goes to shit eventually, his marriage, and you can tell that there's definitely something off about her. I mean, the way that she's talking about his marriage, it's hard to keep a romance alive when he starts throwing punches in it. She asks about Joshua. She saw his face. He can't seem to help himself. He says he's gonna go get Anderson, and just like what Blake did, she's trying to torture him. She's mentally torturing him. She's taunting him, and that's exactly what the demon did. You definitely know that there most likely is a demon inside of this woman, and she asks what he saw when he did that to him. He goes to help her walk. She screams when he grabs her, exactly the same thing that Blake and Joshua did, and Anderson then gets her back on her feet, thanks him, says he knows she appreciates his help so much, but she's not up for a visit today, and Kyle and Anderson then walk out. Anderson asks what happened in there, and Kyle says that she was asking questions about Joshua and what they saw that time, and Aaron says he's not surprised people are always looking for lurid details, and Kyle says that when she fell, he went to help her, and when he touched her, she reacted just like Joshua and Blake, and she's one of the ones he exorcised, and Aaron says about 2 years ago, it took him almost a week to drive the demon from her, but he feels that it's gone. He feels that it's out of her and that they don't have to worry about it anymore, but Kyle, you can tell, is not so sure. Which brings up one of the most interesting parts of this episode, which is the idea of, does Anderson really do anything? When he exorcises these demons, does it really have an impact on them? Is he really exorcising them? And does he really know how to exorcise a demon? And Kyle asks if he saw it come out, and Anderson says he told him it's not always like that. Kyle asks how he knows it's gone, and Anderson says because he had faith in the power of God over the devil. Things change people, they get old, and they lose something of themselves, but she's been sitting in the pews of his church for 2 years, singing hymns and praising the Lord, and he thinks he'd know if he was preaching to a demon, and Kyle then walks away. He's still very unconvinced. He feels there's definitely something going on that Anderson just isn't seeing, and Giles is then walking around the woods. He takes off his backpack and jacket, looks through his canteen, drinks as he looks at the trailer, and the trailer's open. He doesn't know why, but he obviously knows there's something going on with that trailer, and he wants to know what it is. So Megan's the main dinner when Mark gets home. He asks how her day was, and she says the usual. He says last night was nice, and he feels they should do it more often, spending some time alone. And he worries sometimes when they just don't talk enough. And she says welcome to parenthood. Every dinner out causes them a week's worth of franks and beans, and he says he's her knight in shining armor. He says he thinks it's kind of sweet she never told him about it, but he knows she used to dream about a hero and a white stallion. And she asks if that's why she married him, because he's a cop, and he says that's not what he said. And she says it's insulting. She doesn't want to hear it again. She calls Holly to dinner, and you can just tell she's very tortured by what he did. And that night, after putting Holly to bed, we pretty much find out what Donnie did. We see Megan thinks back to her childhood, and it's a really grim scene. I think even worse than what happened to Sarah, because Sarah, of course, was possessed. This was not Donnie possessed. This was Donnie who he was as a teenager. We see Megan thinks back to when she was like a young child. I'd say like she was like 12 is how old I'd say she was, 12 or 13, because Donnie looked about my age, and then Megan, I'd say it was like 12 to 13. It's still disgusting, but basically she was wrapped in like a towel, I'm assuming taking a shower, and she's trying to run away from Donnie, only for him to catch her, and we are to assume that he sexually abused her. Really crazy stuff, but I like that we now know what's going on there. She now gets ready for bed. She then finds a safe that has a gun in it, and I'm wondering, is she gonna go kill him herself? Because she already told Kyle and Mark not to do anything. So I was wondering if she's just gonna go and kill him, because I think they're really showing Megan can handle things in herself, and I like that they're kind of showing the badass that Megan is, because I would have never assumed Megan to be a badass, but you definitely do see that here. So Kyle's walking home from getting groceries. He sees Mark, who tells him to hop in, and Kyle asks how long is this going to take. Mark says depends, tells him to get in, and they go to a bar, and Mark then buys him a beer and says that he used to be his label, and Kyle says it's been a long time. Mark says there's a reason for that. Mark says they need to talk. Kyle says he tried to keep his head down, he lost his cool, but you can tell that Mark is definitely not there for that. You know, there's definitely more that he wants talking about that has nothing to do with Kyle's past. And we get to what I think is one of the best scenes in this episode between Mark and Kyle, because they actually get somewhere in this episode. We've known previously Mark is not, you know, a fan of Kyle. He really wants nothing to do with him because he feels that Kyle is this, you know, really just vile man who hurt his daughter and everything. And Mark says that he doesn't even want to know. He talks to him about Donnie and asks if he knows anything about him. And at first, Kyle says no and asks if he was the one who put Megan in foster care. And Kyle asks how much she told him, and Mark says just that. He was a foster kid her parents took in, and he abused her but never told him his name. And Kyle asks what he said. Mark said that all he said was that they went way back, and Kyle says he found out what he was doing. He started sleeping on the floor of a room. He couldn't fight back, and win or nothing, he could just get in the way or take a beating. And basically, Mark realizes that this was the kid that did that. This was a foster kid, and Mark says that he thought she made the whole thing up just to defend him after everything with Allison and Amber. And I think it really is kind of changing his opinion about Kyle, and I really like this scene here. You really do see these two are bonding. You really do see that they're both trying to help out each other, and I really like that. And Kyle says that she wants them to let it be. He thanks him for the drink, walks out, and he knows he can't really do anything, which really sucks. But Megan then sees a horse on the ground. She goes to get something, and she sees something in her closet, and we don't know what exactly she sees, but she goes to the hotel, confronts him, says he has to leave town, while having a gun in her purse the entire time. I thought she was going to end up shooting him in this scene, but she tells him that he has to leave town. He says he's sorry, but he has business here. She says she doesn't care, tells him to talk inside, and he says he has a few minutes, and they go inside, and he pours some coffee, and he says he shouldn't have interrupted her dinner the other night. She says that she's not here because of that. In the same house was too close, and in the same town was too close, and he says they both have to deal with what happened back then, and she has to be serious, and he says he was a fucked up kid. It doesn't excuse it doesn't excuse, but it is what it is. He says he's not the kid anymore. People change. She says there's no way he could ever change enough, and he says it cost him too after he got kicked out of the house. He wound up in the county's children's home, and no one's gonna want to take in a kid like that. She feels that he's playing the victim card. That's what she feels, that he's playing the victim card, blame it all on her, but you can tell that he's definitely not doing that. That's something I do like about Donnie, is that to me, it seems like he has kind of cleaned up his act, just the way he talks to her, but then some things that he says, I'm like, I don't really know if you can trust this guy, and he says, and I can understand obviously why Megan wants nothing to do with him, I mean, especially after something like that. This was something that Megan never thought of, you know, she never thought she'd really have to re-encounter this again, but now that he's come back in her life, she has to remember all the shit that he did to her. And he says he's there to sell tires, but actions do have consequences, his and hers. She says he thinks this haunts her, that's what he wants to hear, and because of him, she's broken. And she says that he's an arrogant prick, that He's nothing to her, a bump in the road, something she scraped off her shoe a long time ago, and he asks why she's there in her hotel room all by herself. Maybe he's more than a bump in the road to her, maybe he does haunt her, and she says she's here to protect her family, because if Mark ever finds out who he is, she won't let him ruin his life over a meaningless piece of shit like him over nothing. The problem is there's some great dramatic irony here, because she doesn't know that her husband already knows who Donnie is, and things really could not have gotten worse than they do a little bit. We'll get into that a little bit later, though, because Anderson then goes back to Mildred, and you don't really know why. You know, you're thinking he's just going to go back to her just to talk to her and ask him if Sophie's there, and she says she's not there, and Mildred says that he can't spend all his time being cooped up with her, and she probably went back to Houston, and he asks if he can come in. She lets him in. He says he wanted to check in after the incident yesterday, and she says that was his friend's doing and not hers. He asks what happened exactly, and she says she tripped, and thank God she didn't fall over and break the other hip. He says Sophie said she doesn't enjoy visiting her grandchildren anymore, and she says that they used to be cute, but now one of them is going off to law school, and the girl, all she wants to do is whore around, and there's nothing cute about that. And Anderson says that there's certainly a change in attitude for her. This doesn't seem to be the same woman that he knows. And she says that they changed, and how does anyone expect her to stay the same? And yeah, I mean, I get what she's saying, that a lot of old people, you know, I'm not saying that all elderly people are like this, but when someone is older, they really question why someone acts a certain way or why they act, you know, in this vile way that they do, because she's not used to, you know, she's not used to a 13-year-old acting this way. This isn't something that she's used to, and basically he talks about how, you know, they used to sit there for hours playing Scrabble, backgammon, why they have to change, and she says she doesn't have much time left, she's tired of playing games with him, and she scares him right there, which honestly scared me, I'm not gonna lie. It was a good jump scare, because the demon face actually pops out, but then she says she's just joking around, but most times I'd say, okay, that was a false jump scare, but it's not a false jump scare, because you can tell that definitely she's not acting like herself, and asks what if they like who they become, what if it works better for them this way. Anderson asks how can it be better to hurt the people who want to help her, to reject their love, leave a hole in their soul. She says holes can be filled, there's room inside a human soul for so much more than love, and God, something that feeds it in ways he hasn't imagined, and she says she changed her mind, she does love their little games, asked to play Scrabble, and you can just tell that there's something off about her. You don't know what it is, but she most likely is still possessed, and we'll get into that in a little bit, because that's one of the most interesting parts, probably the most interesting thing about this episode. Giles is then taking a piss near a tree. He watches from the bushes as his friend douses the trailer with kerosene, sets it on fire, and somehow his friend is connected to all this. I mean, again, he gave his friend the watch, and we don't know what his friend's capable of. I don't know if his friend's possessed, but definitely there's something going on there, and that's going to be very interesting. Anderson then goes to Kyle and tells him his favorite sin is everybody goes from monster, wrath, the sexy ones, and Kyle says that's lust, but Anderson says he's talking about pride. It sneaks up on you because it doesn't feel like a sin, and there's nothing wrong with feeling good about himself and taking pride in a job well done, and Kyle says to start getting used to it because he doesn't notice when the job wasn't done well, and Anderson says that he's actually right. There's a job he didn't do well, and you kind of get the sense that even though Anderson, performed all these exorcisms for years, it might not have done anything. Those demons might still be in those, avenged souls. I mean, think about Blake. They couldn't save him. Who's to say they didn't save Joshua? Who's to say they didn't save, Sarah? Who's to say they didn't save Mildred? And especially, we'll get into that in a little bit, but basically, Kyle, and especially Allison as well. We'll get into that in a little bit, though, but Anderson says it's spiritual, and basically, Anderson says that he's right, there's a job he didn't do well, Kyle says he'll get his coat, and realizes that he wants to go back to see Mildred, but when he goes back to see her, Sophie enters, asks why they want to see her. Anderson says it's a spiritual matter, and Sophie asks if he thinks that she's spitting up her pea soup, head spinning around, floating up to the ceiling, and Anderson says that she's there, that there's something she doesn't know about her mother, she doesn't believe in the possession, you can tell, just like Mark and Megan, she doesn't believe in this possession, and Anderson says still inside of her. Sophie says that she's calling the police. Kyle says they can't leave like this, and Anderson decides to actually leave. It's such a brilliant scene. He's about to leave, but not before leaving the trinket that she gave to him on her doorstep to remind himself that she still needs saving. He, in fact, has not saved her, and I thought that definitely was very interesting. And it makes sense why we saw that scene, because it shows that he feels victorious over doing this, but really, he hasn't done much of anything. In fact, it doesn't really seem like he's saved them, which is one of the most interesting things, and just so interesting, because it seems like Anderson has been the one to save everyone, but now it seems like he might not be the one. He might not know how to save them, and that definitely is very interesting. I can't wait to see where that goes. But then at the end of this episode, which was kind of inevitable, but also just as crazy what happens here, because we see that evening, Mark pulls Donnie over. He's making his way out of town. Donnie pleads, but Mark enacts his revenge, beats the living shit out of him on the side of the road, and unfortunately the entire incident of nose to Mark is captured on his police dash cam, and we don't know what's going to happen there, but I think Mark just really made matters worse. I mean, Megan talked about how Mark is really going to ruin things, and yeah, Mark just made things a ton worse for everyone, and I don't really think he thought about that. Giles then calls Mark, asks him what he did with the evidence from the camp they found, and Mark says that he boxed it up like he told him to. He said he was going to take care of it, and Giles says he knows what he said, but tells him to open the box because the case is still open, and now he's convinced that Mark was right. The case is still going on. There's more going on, especially with his friend. He's very suspicious about him, and he knows there's something going on there, so I thought that was very interesting. Megan then sees him washing his hands, says she heard him talking. He says it was just Giles telling him the usual, asks if Holly is sleeping, and she says finally a little drama, but she thinks she was just overtired, and she said it's fine. He asks how her day was, and she says that he knows, and I kind of get the sense that she kind of knows, you know, that he knows about Donnie, so I think that's interesting. Anderson and Kyle are then in the car. Anderson says that he's a sucker. Kyle says that she may not be the only one. He said he played board games with Mildred for 2 years and he didn't have a clue. And what if it's the same with Allison? What if they didn't save Allison? Because Allison, as we know, and Sarah, the black goo did not come out of them, and that's something that Anderson hasn't seen before. So I'm thinking that really these people that they thought they saved, they have not saved. It's only kind of gone, and he tells them to turn around because he has to see his wife. Aaron says he understands, but he can't just burst in there. Kyle says he was about to bust down Mildred's door. Aaron says she doesn't have a restraining order on him. He realizes he's driving off the road, continues to drive, and they're probably going to go confront Allison. I thought that definitely was very interesting what's going to happen there. If he's gonna see Allison, because I think we've been leading up to this moment, that moment where he's gonna go get to see his wife again, have that life, but again, you know, he had the restraining order, and she thinks it's his fault, and I think it definitely is interesting, and Megan then airs out her frustration, and then we see at the very end of the episode, Megan, you know, a very high-strung, very uptight, she decides to air her frustrations in her backyard. She takes all of these boxes, and she literally starts sledgehammering glassware, and it's a crazy scene, but that is the way the episode ends. Really interesting stuff going on. Let's just get into this episode. So really, I don't just think this episode was probably the best episode we've had since the first episode, but also really interesting and some really compelling concepts here. Just the idea that Anderson, who's been a reverend for all these years and performed all these exorcisms, they might not have done much of anything, and that's overall really interesting. Has he saved Allison? Has he saved Sarah? And did he save Mildred is the big question. We know for a fact Mildred is definitely not safe, and we know that Blake as well, he is also not saved. We know for a fact those two definitely are not saved, and like I said, Joshua's billed as a recurring character, and so is Blake. So I'm wondering if those demons are going to come back to haunt them. And I'm thinking that Sydney is the man behind all of this, and maybe it's not that. I mean, I'm thinking maybe Sydney is torturing them. I don't really know, but I'm pretty sure just the way that Sydney acts, the way that's going on, I feel like he's the one that's controlling all this, and he's the reason why the evil is back in town and why it's, you know, worse than it ever is. I think that's the main reason why that's going on, and I think that's overall very interesting. As far as Donnie, what is going to happen now? Because we know now that Mark, you know, he's now beat up Donnie. He's not dead, thank God. I'm glad they didn't kill off Donnie, because I want to see more what's going on with him, but it's all now on his police cam, and I don't know if he's going to have to cover up that evidence or what's going to happen there, but I'm pretty sure that Mark's going to realize that evidence is there, and if he's smart, which I'm sure he is, he'll cover it up, but again, he just wasn't really thinking. He was trying to protect his wife, and he did whatever he could to do that, and unfortunately, in doing so, he ended up making things a whole lot worse, which I don't really blame the guy necessarily, since this was the man that raped his wife and everything, but at the same time, it really didn't fix anything. He made everything so much worse, and I can't wait to see the way that that's going. We're really leading, you can tell, to that Allison-Kyle confrontation. I think that definitely is going to come up soon. I'm looking forward to seeing how that's all going to go down, especially because, as we know, the troubled past that Kyle has, and especially the history that Kyle has with Allison. I think that is going to be really interesting. Mark. I really think that Kyle has proved himself to Mark that he's not the demon that Mark thought he was. He's not really an animal, and as we know, he wanted nothing to do with Kyle, but it's really starting to seem like he's coming around. Like, it's really, I think Mark's really realizing there's more going on than he thinks, and like I said, I'm really hoping that Donnie's not possessed. I'm hoping that's not what this is, because I think it'd be a lot more interesting if he's not. I don't want everyone on the show to be possessed. I want the show more to be about literal and physical and, you know, figurative demons, and I think definitely Megan's is a figurative demon, while everything Kyle's dealing with are literal demons, which I'm hoping is what's going on there. Giles, how is his friend connected to all this? Because again, we know that Giles, obviously, you know, he's now on the hunt, but who is this friend? How does he know him? Why does he have the wristwatch? And why did Giles just so casually give it to him? I mean, that's something definitely, Giles is in on this. I know there's definitely something more going on. He either knows something about his friend, and why did his friend just castrate the trailer? I mean, there's definitely more going on that we don't know, and I can't wait to see what's going on with that, because there definitely is something going on with his friend, and I don't know exactly what it is, but I think that's overall really interesting. And then Mildred, how are they going to save Mildred? I don't even know if it's possible to save Mildred at this point, especially after what we've heard. I don't know how that's going to all go down. But overall, guys, like I said, for me, this was the best episode since the first episode. I absolutely loved everything about this episode. This was definitely more of a transition episode, but there were so many great scenes here. There was so much that went down here, and can't wait for the next episode. Luckily, I can watch episode 5, which I will most likely review it after what I review next, which I'll get into. But let me know what you guys saw this episode, left your thoughts on it, and I will see you guys in my next video. I'm really, like I said, loving the show, but I will see you guys next week for this 90-minute, which is insane. I can't believe it's 90 minutes, but the 90-minute season finale of Outlander, which I am so ready for, and I will see you guys for that. Okay, bye.